So thank you for Tony and Amir for inviting me along to do this talk. I'm really glad that you guys are here to look at how we can shed some light on why workers do behave unsafely despite all our best efforts to improve on their particular and personal safety. So as Tony said, we are about to look at the brain functions. These are automatic brain functions that cause us to take shortcuts, and the biases that sit around those risk perceptions. We're also going to talk about the influence of safety culture and how accepted standards become common practice. We'll also talk about the impact of rules and how this doesn't necessarily impact behaviour. And then we'll talk about bridging that human error gap and how technology is a really useful short-term tool to be able to use. So I want to start by talking about those internal brain mechanisms that make us unsafe. So I don't suppose that you will be surprised to hear that human beings make mistakes. We make poor decisions. We have errors in judgment. And the reason for this is because if you think about the brain is in three sort of sections primarily, and the middle section is called the limbic system, and that limbic system is where our survival instinct comes from. Now, the minute we think about survival, we think about safety, and yet for some reason these shortcuts in the brain actually make us unsafe, and I want to explain the reason why. So if you think about the brain in primitive times, we only had 4 jobs to do. We had to eat, sleep, find shelter, and mate. Now, in order to survive and do all of those things, the part of our brain that is our survival instinct only has really one function to do that, and that is to save energy. Because if you save energy, you can do those 4 things relatively easily and safely. So with that in mind, bring that same brain function into modern day. It's the only part of the brain that hasn't evolved. The reason it hasn't evolved is because your brain's primary function is still to survive and therefore still to conserve energy. And it's those very mechanisms of conserving energy that once served us really well that actually now puts us in danger. And I want to explain just 3 of those functions today, but I want you to know that there are probably about 15 different biases that will create shortcuts in our brains. So these 3 are only really there to give you a flavour of why our brains take shortcuts. So the first one I want to talk about is alpha state, and you will know this as a daydream, and you've probably heard this before, but it's one of the top reasons that people do make mistakes. So the thing about alpha state is that you need an accumulation of about 10 minutes in every hour. Now, to caveat that, when you first woken up, you probably need less, and as the day goes on and you get more tired or more stressed, you're going to need more. But on average, it's an accumulation of 10 minutes in every hour, and it could be spent in a few seconds here or there, or a few minutes. Or if you're driving home from work and it's a 20-minute journey, you could daydream for that whole 20-minute journey. If you've ever got to your drive and thought, you know, I went through traffic lights and I've no idea if they were on red, then you've definitely had a type of daydream. Now, the thing about these daydreams is the reason they are there is to conserve some brain energy. It kind of tops up your energy, your brain energy battery, if you like. And so we need these. It isn't humanly possible to stop these types of brain functions because as part of your survival instinct, they're done unconsciously. So you've got no control over whether you have daydreams or not. People sometimes say to me, I don't daydream. And that's just simply not true. They're just actually not aware of it, but they do. Now, the reason this is a problem at work is because we don't stand still to take these mental breaks any more than we do when we're driving home. We don't pull over and think, well, I'm about to have a daydream. I best pull over and have it because I'm driving, you know, a dangerous vehicle. And the same applies in work. When you're working trackside, if you're near an open line, believe me, if you're daydreaming for any more than a few minutes, it's so easy to cover ground 2 to 3 meters. And that could put you, in your life in danger under those circumstances. So there is the problem with daydreaming. Now, what it means is that every single worker is going to daydream on average in an 8-hour shift for an hour and 20 minutes. Now, if you've got a team of upwards of 5 to 6 people, that means you've almost like you've got a person missing within an 8-hour shift. And that includes the cost, the pick, the site warden. Nobody is exempt from this. I've had people say to me before, I don't know why people just don't stay alert. And the truth is, they just can't. It's not humanly possible to do that. And so, this is something that we need to take into consideration when we are dealing with human beings. It's one of the reasons they take risks and make mistakes. The next one I want to talk to you about is complacency. We call this availability heuristics. And I love this part of your brain because this part of your brain is like a super highway. If I said to you what has 4 legs, 1 tail and barks, you would instantly say dog. Now, the brain mechanism that's taken to retrieve that answer has actually taken up a lot of energy. And of course, as we've said, the brain doesn't like to use too much energy. So this part of the brain, if you're in a dangerous environment, would keep you alert all the time and drain a lot of that brain energy, which of course it doesn't want to do. So it also does a mini risk assessment and says, okay, if I look back into my memory and I've not had an accident or an incident for however long, the likelihood of it happening is so small that actually I don't want to waste this brain energy on staying alert. And so that's how complacency sets in. The brain stands down that alertness because the likelihood of you having an accident seems to be small. But of course, that's not the case. It's a bit like when I go out onto trackside, when I'm out trackside and a train goes past, and all of the seasoned workers will acknowledge the driver, they'll put their hand up, and they'll be in a place of safety, and they will just kind of carry on doing whatever they're doing. Me, on the other hand, I'm holding on to something for dear life because I can feel the train like trying to drag me in towards it, and my fear response is massive. And the only difference between my brain and the worker's brain is exactly this. I haven't had enough experience where I've been safe to make my brain stand down and become complacent. Again, I mean, I remember, working in health and safety for the last 30 odd years, and people used to get told off for being complacent. And truth be known, again, it's just another human brain mechanism that is out of our control. It's done unconsciously. So this is another way that people can start to make mistakes because they stop perceiving risk. The last one I want to talk to you about is called the optimism bias. And this is where people think it won't happen to me. Okay. Now, again, it's a primitive instinct because there had to be someone in a tribe that would go and try that new berry or walk a path that had never been walked before. In other words, there had to be people who would take some risks for the greater good of the tribe. But of course, if they thought they were going to die in doing that, they wouldn't want to go and do it. So this part of the brain is one that says you can take a calculated risk. All you need is to be in control. And if you're in control, then nothing bad will happen. Now, the problem here is that humans typically overestimate just how much control they have. There's been studies done for literally decades on this, and every single study will come back and say human beings always overestimate how much control they have. And I see this all the time, and I'm sure you do too, because what happens is you see somebody who's taking a very obvious risk and you think, oh my God, what an idiot. Why are they doing that? because to you, you see the immediate danger. You haven't got the benefit of their optimism bias. Okay. What they're doing is they feel like they've calculated the risk. And in doing so, they believe that they can control it. But of course, as we said, they overestimate this. So it's another way that people will take risks. Now, those are, as I said, those are three. But in all honesty, there are so many more. But I want to give you a flavour that there are these internal brain mechanisms that take shortcuts. It isn't a worker fault that we do this. It's a human fault. And what we've always done in health and safety traditionally is we've tried to stop human fault by putting rules and regulations in place. And so that's what I want to talk to you about next. So for as long as I can remember, rules in health and safety have been king. And whenever there was an accident or an incident, what would happen is we would have a look to see where people hadn't followed the rules. And even if you do a just culture, that is still a blame culture, in my opinion. Who's not followed the rules and how has this accident happened? And then what we do, the second thing we would do is we would rewrite the rules in such a way that we would try to mitigate the next person who read those rules from making the same mistake again. Unfortunately, we put way too much faith in how people can prioritize rules over common practice. And I can tell you, it's not something that human beings do. And I want to give you an example of that from everyday life. So imagine on British motorways, we all know that the safe speed limit is 70 miles an hour. But I think you'll agree that there is a cultural acceptance of people speeding above that level. And I would say probably the average is 75 to 80 miles an hour. So in other words, collectively, we break that rule and it's cultural. We don't necessarily make a conscious decision every time we get on a motorway, today I'm going to speed. We do this because it's just a collective norm. It kind of happens quite naturally just through cultural infection. And I want to explain about cultural infection because this is important, again, to the workplace and why people take risks. Cultural infection works a little bit like hypnosis. And if any of you have been hypnotized, you'll know that what happens is the hypnotist stands down the conscious part of your mind. That conscious part of your mind is where you rationalize and filter and justify. So the hypnotist doesn't want any of that because that would stop you from being suggestible. What the hypnotist does is stands down your conscious mind and plants suggestions directly into your subconscious mind. Okay. Now, this is important in terms of our workspace and on British motorways because what happens is your conscious mind stops registering all the low standards or breaking of rules, okay, because it's commonplace. We stop seeing it, but your subconscious mind is still taking that information in. Okay, and this is what happens on sites. Common practice is going to be the biggest indicator of your safety culture than any amount of rules that you try to put in place to mitigate that. So what happens on our motorways is that when we come to a speed camera, we all slow down. And then when we are out of range of the speed camera, we speed back up. And so what we're doing here is we are subordinating safety, okay, and prioritizing getting to our destination quicker. We do that simply because culture allows that to happen. Remember, the brain likes shortcuts. So if we can get from A to B in the quickest possible time, the brain's going to prioritize that over slowing down for the speed limit. So what happens in that kind of culture where a low safety standard is accepted, we only use the rules then in order not to get caught and punished. And I'm sure that will resonate with some of you, in terms of work sites where we know that, people start to work safely when there's somebody in authority there, but otherwise it's common practice all the way. So I want to talk to you about, a little bit more about safety culture and this hypnotic effect. So if I just use this iceberg, because we love an iceberg in health and safety, to explain how human behaviour comes about, and then I'll talk about how that's influenced by the collective. So our beliefs, we'll start at the bottom of the iceberg. Our beliefs are based on our own personal, unique, individual experiences. Okay. The reason I'm emphasizing that is because we can have the same experience as someone else, but still have a different belief about it. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Our beliefs then lead on to an emotional reaction to situations that either reinforce that belief or challenges that belief. That then leads on to thoughts of what we think about that situation. And we start to rationalize and justify and all of that sort of stuff. So those thoughts are kind of the last line of defense before you actually go into action, which is your observable behaviors. So I'm going to give you an everyday example of this so that we can then sort of transfer that and back into the work process. So if you've got two people who go on a roller coaster ride, okay, they're having exactly the same experience. But if one of them enjoys it, what they will get is some nice endorphins and serotonin and a bit of dopamine. All these are happy hormones, and we love that. So your thought process then becomes, how do I get on that ride again? Is the queue short enough that I can go and do it again? The thought process is, I want to repeat that experience. On the other hand, the other person is absolutely hating every minute of this same experience, and they're getting stress hormones, they're getting adrenaline and cortisol. Now, those stress hormones don't feel good. So the thought process then is, how can I avoid repeating that experience? And what happens then is then we behave in different ways. I will go and queue up, which would be an indication to you that I enjoyed the ride, and the other person would walk away as fast as possible, maybe to a toilet, and you understand then that they've not had a good experience and didn't enjoy it. So we can kind of guess, if you like, based on someone's behaviour, what their thoughts and beliefs are. Now, the thing is, if you've got people who've worked on the ballast for many years, and they've had this hypnotic drip feed over years and years and years of seeing low safety standards, they will subordinate safety and prioritize saving time. Okay, just like we do on the motorways. So we're not judging this person because we all do this. But that's what would happen. Not consciously, because if you ask this person consciously, do you believe safety is important? Every time they're going to say yes, because that's the right answer. And consciously, rationally, they believe that to be true. But here's the problem. You can see this iceberg. Everything below the waterline is your big powerhouse, the thing that drives your behavior. So if your subconscious mind believes that safety is not that important, that's the thing that's going to drive your behavior. So if I give you an example of this, we've got a guy who's worked on the tools for, say, the best part of 30 years. And he has seen every low standard going. And again, he doesn't see it consciously anymore. His brain's stopped looking at that, but subconsciously, that is being drip fed on a daily basis. And you can see the experiences that I've put underneath the iceberg there. Those are the types of things that he's seeing and has seen on a constant basis. So subconsciously, his belief is that safety isn't that important. Now, on this particular day, he's been working on a site for 2 weeks, and for 2 weeks, they've had a job and knock. Okay, he's gotten away early every single day for 2 weeks. Got no reason to believe that on this day, it won't be any different. So he goes into work, but today he's got to get back home for a family appointment. And it's absolutely massively important that he gets there on time. So he gets to site, but during the work shift, he's told, as with his team, they've finished their job. They've got to redeploy to another site, and it's half an hour away, further away from his home. So already his emotion is being piqued. This emotion of it's frustration or anger. He doesn't want this to be happening to him of all days today. So they get to this site, this new site, and it means that he's going to work pretty much up to the end of the shift as well. So he's losing loads of time in his perception right now. So at the end of the work, he's got a choice. He can either walk from the place that he's working to the safe egress area, which is half an hour away, but then he's got to almost come back on himself to get to his van for about 20 minutes. So to get from where he is to his van in the right way is going to take 50 minutes. Or he can take a calculated risk. Remember what I said about the optimism bias? I'm in control, so I'm okay. He's going to take a calculated risk, go over a line, over a fence, and it will only take him 10 minutes to get to his van. Now, I'm not expecting you to shout out here, but I'm going to ask you the question, what is he likely to do? And I hope that I've sort of proved to you already that he's likely to take the risk. Okay. Just as we do when we're driving our car. He will go to pains not to get caught, if that's a possibility, but he will calculate that risk and probably take it. Now, the issue I have here as a safety culture specialist is that if he gets caught, I'm told that he's likely to be suspended, maybe have his tickets taken away from him if he's got costs or something like that. Could even just lose his job completely. And yet, he wasn't the person to allow the safety culture to hypnotize him in the way that it has. Just in the same way that you aren't really responsible for the culture on the motorways. That's not your doing on a personal level. I always implore people at this stage, if you put people to work, if I'm talking to anybody today that puts people to work, I can tell you now, you cannot single-handedly change your safety culture without, an overarching program. But what you can do, and you can do quickly, is you can affect the way your team work. In other words, you can create a micro culture of not accepting low standards. Now, if you go from somebody who's let a few things slide because it doesn't seem such a big deal, to somebody who's constantly reinforcing the rules, I can promise you'll be a pain in the arse, because what you're doing is you're asking people to use more energy, and they're not going to want to do that. But after a while, when that settles down, this will become normal. Good safety standards just become the norm within your team, and therefore take up no more energy than if they don't do it. Okay, because it goes into a habit. It takes no energy at all. So I hope that you can see that we've got internal mechanisms, the brain functions, that make us take shortcuts. Then we've got the safety culture that has a huge influence on whether we take risks or not. And what we end up with is this sort of formula. And it's inevitable that workers are going to take shortcuts because it saves time and energy. Our brains are wired to do that. It isn't a worker's fault, like I said, it's a human fault. And there's nothing we can do about those internal brain functions because you can't change them. And we've already established rules don't override those automatic brain functions. And when workers are given safety information, they're expected to adhere to these processes and procedures. However, once with their peers, they'll learn exactly which rules are adhered to within that group and which ones are ignored. And based on their observations of what others do, that will dictate what rules they follow, what rules they don't. In other words, your safety culture is a combination of common practice and human fallibility. Now, human beings make about 50 mistakes a day. Some make more, some make less. Depends on the day, how tired you are, all of that sort of thing. This is just an average. But it only takes one of those to become serious, even a fatality. And so we need to try and find a solution that sits outside of this human vulnerability. And this is where technology comes in. So changing the work environment to one that doesn't tolerate low safety standards will have the biggest impact. I have to say that as a cultural specialist. Because if you change workers' experience, ultimately, it will change the behaviour. But that will take a significant amount of time and effort and resource. We all know that culture change programs are a long-term goal. And whilst I advocate for this, I do appreciate that in the short term, we do need a solution that will keep people safe here and now. So a change mindset is your long-term goal, but your short-term goal needs to be an immediate solution. And I think technology is so obvious because we're embracing technology in our everyday anyway. And, you know, we use it in our lives for entertainment and communication and information and education. And one of the biggest reasons why technology has taken off as much as it has is because it does something for us that our brain loves. It saves time and energy. And it's literally at our fingertips, so it takes nothing to access it. It's just a fast and easy way to get everything that we need. So, importantly for us, if people are willing to embrace technology for their leisure and their at-home entertainment and time, then why not use technology for safety? And I think this is absolutely the next paradigm shift in safety. So some of the things that we already use technology for is we can use it to with geofencing, which prevents accidents due to loss of situational awareness. It protects people and assets that are in close proximity to trains. We use lone worker devices. These protect people who work remotely and can detect a lack of movement, for example. We've got virtual reality training, which puts people in a realistic environment to experience work, but keeps them in the safety of a classroom. We've got software that can measure whether people are fatigued or stressed. And in actual fact, those measurements happen way before people know that they are feeling that way themselves. And then we've got things like mechanical technology, like drones, that can provide visual information instead of putting people out on sites at risk. And what I love about all of this as well is not only is it keeping people safe in real time, but it provides us big data sets as well. So we can start looking at patterns of behaviours so that we can start to highlight and pinpoint where our specific human risks are, and then we can start to mitigate those risks from there. So you're coming from a place of being well informed. Now, the use of software, firmware, hardware, as I said, is the next paradigm shift to supplement worker safety. So I want to leave you with this thought, because people often ask me, what happens if we rely on technology? And I think, you know, technology gets a bad review in that respect. It's like it can't be trusted. I guess my answer is very often, well, what happens if we just continue to rely on humans? Because the thing about technology is it doesn't get tired. Doesn't give in to peer pressure. It doesn't become complacent. It doesn't daydream. So you program it in, and I'm not saying it's perfect, because technology is constantly being upgraded and getting better and better, and there's always room for improvement. But I can tell you that in you know, comparison to human beings, technology is not going to make 50 mistakes a day. That's a fact, you know. So I would caveat that slightly, because if I give you an example, if you are using a sat nav and you come to a set of traffic lights that are on red, and the sat nav is saying turn right, you wouldn't just follow the technology's instruction. You would use your driver competency to stay at the red light until it changed green, and then you would turn right. And I think that a lot of technology needs to be used in this supplementary way, as opposed to taking over and being totally relied upon. However, I cannot state enough that we can rely on technology far more than we can on human beings. And yet what happens is people go, I need evidence. I don't trust this piece of equipment. I'll trust a human being instead. And in doing that, this is where we have these accidents. That's the end of this. Just one last thing. I talked about dopamine before, and it's just occurred to me that I ought to add this in. A culture where workarounds and shortcuts has been rewarded in the past will create dopamine. That is the hormone that will say, I need to repeat this experience. Okay. So when it comes to culture, that's another reason why we must make people aware that there is no room for low safety standards. Okay. If there's a legacy of that, then we have to start making it easier and more dopamine filled to actually celebrate safety rather than punishing a lack of safety. Okay, so with that, I'm going to finish. I hope you found it useful and interesting, and I don't know if there are any questions, but I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you very much, Jules, for your presentation. What I'll do is read through the questions that have been submitted online. But before I do, can I remind people that it's important to update your CPD records with your attendance on the webinar, claim those CPD points. IOSH won't be issuing a certificate, but remember you get the benefit from your attendance by updating your CPD. So Jules, I'll go to the first question. So Ed Hodson has asked, this is a very interesting topic. It appears highly relevant to unsafe acts, but could you discuss if there are any possible emotional interactions with unsafe conditions?
Oh, I'm not quite sure what I'm being asked. I'm sorry. Does Ed want to, can Ed unmute and just explain what the question, I'm just not sure what he's asking for.
I think that what Ed is wanting to explore is, do we think that there is a relationship between unsafe acts and emotions and unsafe conditions?
Yes. Yeah, for all sorts of reasons. So if you are, for example, if you've got poor mental health, let's just say, and so you've got a low mood, what that does is it puts you in survival mode, and survival mode heightens that shortcut. You know, I'm in survival mode. I need to conserve more energy, and therefore, this is why when people are in an over emotional state, they tend to make more mistakes because it physically, I mean, this is not just a hormonal thing, but it physically draws down blood from your conscious mind, the one that rationalizes and justifies, um, in order that you react on instinct, because your subconscious mind works um, in billions of seconds. It's 80 times faster than your conscious mind. So when you're in survival mode, using your conscious mind, which is slower, could mean the difference between life and death if you have to rationalize a situation. So this physical draining of blood stops you from using that slower conscious mind and upscales this intuitive and instinctive and very quick subconscious thinking. That's your survival instinct. And your survival instinct says, cut corners, conserve energy. And this is, again, this is why we make more mistakes when we're over emotional. I hope that's answered the question.
Thank you, Jules. The next question we have from Keith. He's asked, regarding brain activity and complacency, a commonly used term, one that he doesn't like, is can the lack of attention be explained by the brain's lack of focus, and can work be completed to retain focus?
Okay, so if you've ever done anything like a selective attention test, some of you will have seen the gorilla test, where there's two groups of players, t-shirt wearing black, t-shirt wearing white, and you're asked to look at how many passes are made, and then a gorilla comes on and people don't see it. And this is because your brain isn't wired to focus on lots of things. Again, just purely because it takes too much energy. So the way I always describe it is, if you have, let's just say, your main focus, so you're focusing in on your job, there might be things in your environment or what other people are doing or other works that you are sort of semi-aware of, for all sorts of different reasons. You might just be kind of semi-aware, but there will be lots of other things going on in the environment and with people and the works that you will just simply blot out, because the human brain it's not capable of holding on to too many things in one go. If you do a memory test, which is purely cognitive, you can hold on to about 5 things. But if this is an environmental test, you'd be lucky to hold on to 3. So the first part of the answer is it's impossible for a human brain to focus on lots of things all in one go. The second part is you can't stop human beings from being like that. I think that's one of the things I want to get across today is, you know, we used to have rules and try and shoehorn people into A, B, C rule and expect that those rules would stop them being complacent or having been tired or becoming complacent. They don't. They don't. And we can't do that. The only thing we can do to support human safety is to fill those gaps with something that sits outside of their conscious and subconscious brain. Okay? Because plugging those gaps is the best we can do for human beings.
Thank you, Jules. We've got another question from Gary, who says, if technology is the best approach, what place does traditional in-person training courses have in promoting behaviour change? Will they still be trusted more than technology solutions because they're provided by humans, or is technology essential to fill in the gaps?
Okay, So I think there is a place for raising conscious awareness. So I think there is a place for this behavioural stuff within training. And I hope that you've experienced that today, actually, with what I've been saying, because here's what happens. If you get a good trainer who doesn't just do sort of stats and is dry, one that gives you real life examples, what happens in your brain is, and this is the way the brain works. When you receive information, you store it in pictures, okay? And when you recall it in pictures. So if you're giving someone information and you give them a story so that they can create a picture, then they're likely better to recall it. So when it comes to training, bringing something into the conscious awareness is a bit like if you know, let's say you're buying a new car and you know the make and the model and the colour that you want, and you go out onto the motorway and suddenly you see hundreds of them where you never saw them before. That's purely because your brain has switched onto that conscious awareness. It's something that has emotionally piqued you, and therefore you are more aware of it. So bringing people's behaviours into conscious awareness is good if it piques their emotion. In other words, if they can relate to it. Because what will happen is, in any given situation, then they'll be reminded. The brain will bring that forward and go, do you remember that story that person told? Or, and it will just pique them a little bit more than they would have done before. So I do think that there is room for the behavioural stuff in training, and I do think it makes a difference on the training day. Okay, it will be stored and it will be recorded if it's had enough emotional resonance. However, I will still say that if the culture is such that you feel obliged to it, I suppose, the culture will still prevail. Even though you know these things. I know people, when I've said to people during accident investigations, what on earth made you do that? And they've said to me, everybody does it. So it's I can't begin to tell you how strong peer pressure is in terms of people's behaviour, more than a person themselves would admit. We all like to think we've got free will, but in actual fact, studies say that our peers have about 98% of influence over our behaviour if they want us in the group and if we want to be in the group.
Thanks, Jules. We've got another question, this time from David Butler, who has asked, how can we overcome the strong urge for leaders to praise positive productivity outcomes without visibility of the shortcuts and unsafe practices that have taken place in order to achieve the success? And similarly, overcome workers' beliefs that the unsafe acts and shortcuts are therefore necessary to achieve success.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think, when it comes to leadership, again, it is about training. It's about getting people to understand the impact that they have. And it's unfortunate in a way that traditionally it's been a command and control, and it's it's the easiest, quickest way to achieve compliance, presumably. And so because the brain wants that, a leadership brain wants easy and quick, command and control is what traditionally happened. What we're having to do now is we're having to teach leaders how to influence and persuade. And one of the ways that we do that, I do so behavioural product design or behavioural service design. And what we do is we look at end-to-end processes, and we look at where shortcuts, unsafe shortcuts, are rewarded, not in a necessarily praise way, but just rewarded because you've saved time and energy, and where safety adds friction. And then what we do is we start to design that to be the other way around, because that's the only way you're going to change somebody's experience. And it's important that leaders, and particularly frontline leaders, because they cast probably the biggest shadow over worker behaviour, understand that they are promoted probably because of their technical skills. But actually, if they're going to influence people, they're going to start having to have good leadership skills, understand the impact they have on other people, understand how practices impact people. And the truth is, if you have a culture where safety is a high value, and I mean, you know, genuinely is, like psychologically safe, those managers will find that productivity will actually increase significantly in parallel. Whereas at the moment, people are focusing on performance and safety goes the opposite way. So it's just about re-educating people really, and getting them to understand the impact of safety culture and understanding a little bit more about how people's brains work really.
Darren Hedges has written, this is clearly linked to how we brief safe system of work. How can we cut down on the 60-page RAMs with optimism bias? That's a question mark. Can that be done with optimism bias?
So I had a conversation with a manager once who said that people had to read from beginning to end these RAMs, and it was pages and pages long. And the guys were saying to him, nobody reads it. And he's saying, but you've got to. And they were saying, no, but nobody does because it's too long. He was saying, but you've got to. And so I stopped the conversation, and after a while I said to the manager, do you think that as a manager you are a good listener? And he said, oh yeah, definitely. And sometimes we've got blind spots. These need to be surfaced. It's not comfortable, it's quite vulnerable, but those things need to be surfaced, because actually I am with you. I think having pages and pages and pages of RAMs is ridiculous. If you tell a story, it will have more impact than if you have pages and pages of instruction. I'm trying to think of a you know, I suppose if we take the driving analogy, I was once asked to talk about people not wearing seatbelts for work when they were in work vans, and what they had been told in the past was they were told what the law was and what the punishments were, and they were given statistics on accidents and that sort of stuff. All of that, it feels to a human brain like someone else's agenda, your health and safety, and you're trying to get me to improve your statistics, which means that I've got to expend energy, but for your benefit, not mine. And so I created a suite of toolbox talks that were behaviour based, and this was one of them. And what I did a bit of research, and as people were walking into the room, I was saying to some people, you know, you look sort of below 15 stone, you sit at that side of the table and you look over. So, you know, I mean, you can imagine the banter that was going on between these two guys, you know, about being on the wrong side of the table. But yeah, you're over, so you sit on this side of the table. And of course, what was happening was they were wanting to know, well, why are you splitting us up? And so eventually I asked this side of the room, how fast does a Boeing 747 go? And at this side of the room, how fast does a bullet come out of a rifle? And we talked then about the speed. Like, you can see a Boeing, but only because it's so far up in the sky, but you can't see a bullet because it's too fast to see. So we talked about inertia and all that sort of stuff. And then I said to them, so you imagine a person projects, if they hit a stationary object at 30 miles an hour and they're not wearing a seatbelt, they project between 30 and 60 times their own body weight. So you guys are going as fast as a 747, and you guys are going as fast as a speeding bullet. Now, when you hit the ground, because you're not, going the distances probably, when you hit the ground, what does that look like? And I usually smash an egg on a table, just for, effect. And then I say to people, and who would be coming to look at you like that? Who'd be crying over that? And of course, the mood would come down significantly from having that bit of banter to like thinking, Jesus, that's not going to be good. Because what happens is, if you can plant a picture with a high emotion, that will have an effect on people's behavior, because the part of the brain that attaches the picture and emotion is the same brain mechanism as if it was real. Okay, your brain does not distinguish between something you imagine and something that is real. And therefore, when we talk about this, the emotion they feel is real. And that's what stops them from behaving differently. I never ever said to them, you go out there and wear your seatbelts. I just simply said to them, what's the no-brainer here? And they told me to wear the seatbelt. So for me, you can have all these rams, won't make an ounce of difference, but you start talking to people on an emotional level and give them their own reason, because that creates a within. Because when I say to them, who's going to be crying over you, that's not an abstract person. They're imagining the real person crying over them. That's what creates the emotion. So for me, I know it's a big leap of faith, because one of the things that we worry about is if we don't follow these exact rules, that if anything happens, we've got nothing to fall back on. But all I will say to you is, if those rules aren't working, and because that people aren't reading these rams, then, and that, then you're covering your arse and you're not really keeping people safe.
Thank you, Jules. I think this is going to be our last question, and it's a question relating to fatigue. So on fatigue and its impact, it's presuming someone who is tired, has a lack of sleep, will have impaired brain activity. Has any research or work been completed in this area?
Oh, I mean, loads. Yeah, absolutely loads. So yeah, lots of research in terms of how fatigue affects brain function. There's all sorts of reports on this, and actually, if you go onto LinkedIn, I did not so long ago an article about the effects of work that stops and starts, and what you do in between, for example, can have a massive difference on how then you go back into work. I reckon it takes something like 23 minutes to get back into work if you've had to stop for some reason. So if in other words, you're changing your sort of brain focus, it takes about 23 minutes. But if you're tired, it takes up to an hour. And I have to say, and I'm sorry about this, but I include myself in this category, but as you age, fatigue actually becomes a bigger issue, because your adaptive energy, so we've all got an amount of adaptive energy in a day. We use this to help us to be resilient against anything that isn't routine. So anything that happens that's unexpected, we have this finite amount of energy. And the minute that starts to run out, we become fatigued and stressed. So depending on how your day's going, even if you take a wrong turn in, that's going to, take some of that. If you're redeployed to a different site, that's going to take some of that energy. If you've ever heard anybody say, that's it, I'm done, I've had enough, then that's their adaptive energy leaving. And that person's going to feel fatigued and stressed much more quickly now than they did before. There are so many I don't even know where to begin in terms of fatigue studies. But yes, fatigue has a huge effect on the cognitive part of the mind. It will mean that you have to daydream more in order to recharge your batteries. Yeah. I don't know if that's answered the question.
Thanks so much, Jules, for your time. And on behalf of the IOSH Railway Group committee, I'd like to thank you for supporting us and you giving, giving your time and your insight. Just a quick reminder, don't forget to update your CPD records. And also, the committee are really interested in hearing from our members and non-members about topics, webinars, events, what is it that you would like to hear from us and what we can do to support you as individuals. So thank you all for giving up an hour of your day today, and enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.